Game design. In this section, we're going to think about some important issues in terms of gameplay, game genre, and some of the things you might look to either critically review or create, or perhaps they'll just help inform the way you think about and discuss games. So when we think about game design, it's important to consider the purpose of the game. So what are the objectives? What are people learning? What are the rules? And what type of competition? What are people trying to achieve through them? They're multimodal, so colour and sound do not just contribute to the overall atmosphere of the game, they also convey meaning. Much like we've looked at the mise-en-scène within film, we can do the same within games. The visual representation of the game reflects this interactive quality by combining two main elements. We see a representation of the game world and an iconic interface which allows players to direct action in that world. On another level, the texts in the game themselves draw on the affordances of digital media by combining a variety of modes, visual, oral and textual. In order to make sense of the game, players must attend to this combination of modes and interpret a range of cues that are often quite subtle. And Guy, who is quite an important theorist in this area, calls the stories of video games embodied stories because of the way that they're embodied in the player's own choices and actions in a way they cannot be in books and movies. So we have this real physical experience of gameplay, which is quite different to other multimodal texts. Games provide for a new kind of embodied storytelling, with the player positioned as active co-creator rather than passive recipient of information. And the game themselves have become more demanding, often challenging players to solve complex problems as part of a developing narrative. Advanced 3D graphics have made it possible to create intricate and compelling game worlds for players to act in. And so this information in game design particularly comes from a reading from Jones and Hafner, which is a useful one from their book on understanding digital literacies. So we can see how game design has increased in complexity over time by looking at this early video game timeline. So we look at Pong, which was the original video game that was created in 1972. And this is a very simple game and it's a simulation game. Then we can see how we worked through different types of games emerging, particularly as more home consoles became available and things like video arcades became a cultural phenomena that people went to and engaged with for entertainment throughout the 80s. We saw home consoles with the NES and the Sega Master System in the 80s as well, and then the handheld Game Boy was quite a revolutionary bit of technology. Then the rise of some names that are quite familiar to us now that are still going on in new versions of PlayStation and Xbox. We saw the Wii really coming to the fore in 2006 because it allowed for that different type of interactivity and embodied gameplay. And also the role of PCs and the internet as they started to allow social gaming, which we see is now available through modern consoles too. Portable technology brought the rise of apps as we move towards smartphones, and contemporary changes include extended simulation activities and immersive VR technology. So we'll explore these in the tutes and learning activities this week, thinking a bit about that video game history, which is now really coming of age, having been around since the early 70s. Huge amount of changes, largely driven by technology. Much like we can explore genre in film and television or music, we can also explore genre in video games. One easy way to think about this is the type of categories that we might see video games sold under or available in different app stores. There are two particular approaches to studying video games. One is narratological, which is seeking to understand games through narrative paradigms. In other words, trying to understand games through the types of stories they tell. And another approach is ludogical, which seeks to understand games through their structure, elements, and the mechanics of gameplay. So those elements which are really very specific to games themselves. We see a remediation of traditional genre categories, how these are brought across into this new media form and made anew. And there are agodic or interactive categories based on structure and gameplay. Wolf argues for 42 genres of video game. You can see a link there as to what those are. And we can see games can be categorised according to platform, genre, mode and milieu, which is an approach we'll look at in this week's tutorials and learning activities. So your platform is essentially the hardware. How do we actually play this game? How do we access it? What tools do we use to play it? Mode, this is the mode in which the game world is experienced by the players. So what freedom exists for players within the game world? Is it a structured environment or a multi-directional and non-linear environment? Is it single player or multiplayer? What's the physical and social environment outside of the game world? And the milieu is the visual genre. So essentially, what are they immersed within? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Is it science fiction? Is it horror? Is it fantasy? Thomas Apley in 2006 in Genre and Game Studies attempted to provide detailed genre studies and approach to applying new generic conventions to gaming, as gaming was becoming more mature at this time. And we'll discuss here 4 popular video game genres that probably resonate with you as experiences you may have had. These are simulation, strategy, role-playing, and action. So simulation is a quite common and popular genre. Simulated activities such as sports, flying and driving, or simulation of worlds such as towns, cities, communities, and universes. So there's 2 ways that the simulations can operate. They're different to most film, as simulations are not dominated by narratives. So simulation is a very specific genre to games. As Apley notes, what is particular about the conventional genre of simulation games is that they clearly remediate a real-world activity. The player's eventual success or failure at the game is determined by their skill at integrating and contextualizing the various activities involved with the physical rules of the simulation. And simulation games are characterized by the process of the player gradually learning to think like the game and forming a cybernetic loop with the game. And you might think about games like Rock Band and the way that you work through and play that and how you progress and succeed, or one of the very, very many driving games out there. So how do you learn to think like the game? How do you learn to succeed within the game? And how is it simulating a real world activity? Another genre is strategy. This also has a crucial difference to the remediation of cinema, and this genre has the fewest cinematic associations. There are 2 subgenres, real-time strategy and turn-based strategy, and usually you're presented with a god's eye view of the action, and there's a tendency to photorealism, as you can see with these examples here. Usually strategic play is expert play, and it's based on the human capacity to learn. So at the start, a beginner player just responds to what's happening, but the expert players strategize, and success is determined by organising and valuing information with the game. You can probably think of a few different examples that are shown there. Role-playing. This one evolved from the literary fantasy genre through pencil and paper games to electronic games. So you can think of Dungeons and Dragons, which was a classic RPG that evolved. So it's that idea of that turn-based strategy initially, the social aspect was lost, but it was managed through contextual discourse on bulletin boards, blogs, and other mechanisms, because it was about sitting around with a group and working through that literary fantasy experience together. As Apley notes, the game is no longer a collectively produced fantasy, but one which takes place within an official fantasy world with strictly defined parameters. It shifts the focus of the games from role-playing and character development to a series of purely functional challenges where success is measured by the accumulation of rewards. There's a focus on acquiring transformative characteristics through gameplay, and we've seen the rise of Morgs, or sometimes MPORGs, so massive multiplayer online role-playing games, as the internet has become more and more valuable for this type of genre. So it's about contextualizing play and a gaming community. There's the incorporation of the chat function, there's social outcomes for gamers, and role-playing games are an example of convergent technology, the way they work to integrate all of these different elements. So you might think of something like World of Warcraft as an obvious example of this. Then action. There are 2 key subgenres: first-person shooters, so it's as if it's the player's vision with the static object as the avatar. We can think of the classic game Doom as an example here, or third-person games, often with 3D avatars. You can see with Mario there. So the avatar acts to link the perceptual to the cognitive and kinesthetic aspects of the game, Apley says. What does that actually mean? Well, the avatar acts as though it's us there in the gameplay. So it links the perceptions, what we perceive, to the cognitive and kinesthetic, to what's happening in our brain, and to the physical movement aspects of the game. Note that when you're using these sort of terms and you use them well, it helps to add credibility to the types of discussion you're making at university. Action games are intensely performative. So it is action games that will often require the player to engage in extreme non-trivial actions in order to make the ergodic traversal. The abilities possessed by the avatar of the player must be activated by technical performance by the player. So the physical movement and the physical experience that we have of gameplay and action games helps us to really be a part of the performance of the game and to make action happen through the game. So for example, things like combination moves for special attacks show that you've got textual mastery, that you know how to rise to the top in this and to create that performance. So if we look at a genre breakdown of video game sales in the United States in 2017, you can see how a number of these genres present. So strategy is nowhere near as popular as a shooter game. Action games and sport games quite popular, role-playing games also, then adventure, racing, fighting, strategy and others. So interesting to consider. Obviously, if you wanted something that might sell well, you might consider perhaps a shooter or an action game as being at the top of that list for that market. If we look at the all-time best-selling console games based on global unit sales as of March 2018, we can see that there's some similarities there. So useful to have a look at. And again, you might consider what sold well and work your way through as to what hasn't done. Or I guess anything that's in this list has done quite well, but just some ideas there. We also might think about independent games and the role of games as art. So I'm including a link here that you can check out and hopefully it might inspire you. There may be some games that you engage with just purely because they're an aesthetic experience, because they're calming, because they help you to feel positive about the world, or they create an interesting artistic experience. So again, something else that games can achieve. If we look at the worldwide digital games market from March 2018, you can see the most popular games there by PC, console and mobile. And it's interesting to look at which different games are popular on which different type of device. Now, also interesting to be aware of is the popularity of esports. So back when Watson was saying there was a global market for only 5 computers, he certainly wasn't in any way conceiving how popular esports could be. There's been some amazing things that occur within this space of electronic sports. So some recent insights from the esports scorecard: multiplayer online battle arena and shooter games dominated the esports audience in August of 2018. Among the 10 most watched esports titles, 2 were MOBAs and 4 were shooters, garnering 273 million and 237 million viewers respectively. So when we think about esports, these are reaching out to a huge audience, and there's actually a lot of money in it for those who are successful in these spaces. MOBA will continue to reign through November thanks to upcoming tournaments like League of Legends World Championships. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, or PUBG, was the second most watched title of August 2018, despite the lack of an established esports presence. The shooter only launched 6 months ago and has already surpassed 10 million paid downloads. PUBG hosted its first esports event in August, and its official Twitch channel saw 378,000 concurrent viewers, an all-time high for the game. So you can see there how a newly released game can quickly move its way up the charts. 97% of US esports viewers choose to watch competitions on either Amazon's Twitch or YouTube. The market is difficult for new platforms to enter. The 2 main players have built up a wide range of video game content over the years, making them the go-to destination for esports as well. So of course, when we're thinking about electronic sports, we do need to go how are people actually connecting with and watching them. Things like Twitch are very useful. I have a number of friends who are using things like Discord as well. So there's these layers of digital technologies that are embedded. We can also look here at top esports titles by viewership if you want to look through the data and see what people are really connecting with. And then just our last slide to think about in this section is there are games that we might play for reasons of fun or relaxation, but there are also games with a social conscience, which are designed to make a game Designed to make us think, I guess. So there's some links here, things for you to think about, and also this notion of inclusive controllers. So Steve Jobs famously was very focused on inclusivity, and that's been an ongoing gift for users of Apple products. So this is an example of Microsoft unveiling the Xbox Adaptive Controller for those with limited mobility. So we also need to think about the ethics of gameplay. What are the representations? As they discuss in the reader, how are different people represented within the text? What might be problematic? What might be positive? What might make a positive social contribution? So an important thought to leave you there with as you go on to think about both reviewing and designing games.